This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome to Atomic Biscuits 2024-1103. Remember. We'll begin this November with this article from Breitbart.com. Poll 1 in 5 concerned that the election will not be fair. This is by Hannah Knudsen. 1 in 5 Americans have concerns that the presidential election will not be fair. The latest weekly survey from The Economist/YouGov revealed. The survey asked respondents, how much confidence do you have that the 2024 presidential election will be held fairly? Across the board, just 29% said they have a great deal of confidence it will be fair, followed by 18% who said they have quite a bit of confidence. Nearly a quarter, 24%, said they have a moderate amount of confidence, while 22% either have a little confidence or none at all. Of those, 9% said they have none at all. Another 6% remain unsure. Democrats are far more confident that the election will be fair than Republicans, as 55% have a great deal of confidence compared to just 9% of Republicans and 22% of independents who said the same. Another 23% of Democrats have quite a bit of confidence, while 36% of Republicans said they have a moderate amount of confidence, followed by 25% who have only a little confidence and 12% who said they have no confidence at all. The survey was taken October 19th through 22nd of 2024 among 1,615 adult American citizens. The revamped Republican National Committee anticipated these concerns earlier this year and launched a massive election integrity program, which now boasts over 200,000 volunteers to protect the vote. These poll watchers will also work with the guidance of lawyers via state Republican war rooms. As the RNC announced, there is an election integrity hotline in every battleground state. Per the RNC's press release, the state Republican war room is the command center where lawyers will field all incoming questions and issues reported by poll watchers and voters statewide. Lawyers will guide poll watchers through the appropriate election code and provide clarity on how various issues should be answered, resolved, or escalated. This system will be operational from the first day of early voting through Election Day and afterward if necessary. Under the leadership of Chairman Whatley and Co-Chair Trump, the RNC is executing an unprecedented legal strategy, fighting in courtrooms across the country. We will deliver a proactive litigation effort every time election officials are breaking the law, as well as intervene to defend common-sense election law safeguards under Democrat attack. The RNC team of lawyers is already aggressively engaging in legal battles around the country. So far this cycle, the RNC has engaged in 82 election integrity lawsuits in 25 states. We're sending a loud and clear message out there to anyone who thinks about cheating in an election. If you cheat in an election, we will find you, we will track you down, and we will prosecute you to the full extent of the law, RNC co-chair Laura Trump said over the summer. United States Oil and Gas Association issues warning, radical environmentalists are fueling Kamala's energy policies. This is by Amy Curtis over at Twitchy.com. We here at Twitchy recently told you about Kamala Harris's flip-flop-flip on fracking. We all know it's a cynical ploy to play to two different voting blocs, voters in Pennsylvania who rely on fracking for their jobs and economy, and the radical environmentalist left, who will stop at nothing to enact their agenda. Kamala's own engagement director pushed for a gas stove ban, and Kamala supports banning gasoline-powered cars in favor of a 100% electrical vehicle mandate by 2035, even though the campaign walked that back too. The U.S. Oil and Gas Association is sounding the alarm that Kamala actually has her own Project 2025 when it comes to energy policy, and it's being written by environmentalists. The entire post reads, this is from Bloomberg, environmental activists are drafting blueprints for Harris to take a more aggressive stance clamping down on fossil fuels, but in a shift from their approach to Biden 4 years ago, they've largely held their fire in public and haven't pushed Harris to commit to policy decisions or positions that could alienate undecided voters in key battleground states. Blueprints include using executive power on day one to 1. Limit liquefied natural gas exports, 2. Shutting down Energy Transfer LP's Dakota Access Pipeline, which carries oil from North Dakota to Illinois, 3. Push for a swift end to oil and gas production using special emergency authority to bar crude exports. 4. Curb U.S. public investment in foreign fossil fuel projects. 5. A federal investigation of the oil and gas industry's approach to the climate crisis. This means your energy prices will go up, up, up. There's a tweet here from Dave Rogers, IAHPHX, says, this is one issue both sides can agree on. Kamala is not the centrist on energy that she pretends to be. She would harass oil and gas producers every day of her presidency, and the American people would suffer from this. They sure would. Gray Ghost posted on X, this really spells trouble. The plan for Harris to aggressively clamp down on fossil fuels would be disastrous for the U.S. and even worse for Europe. We're talking about shutting down pipelines, cutting off nat gas exports, and trying to end oil and gas production altogether. It will cost people jobs and make everything more expensive for American consumers. Kamala Talk on X posts, yes, of course Harris will take action against oil and gas, and then raise taxes to fund expensive green energy, and blame oil and gas for price gouging when her policies make things expensive. Jude_62 posted on X, wanna laugh? Read the Harvard study that says wind turbines cause global warming. That's without mentioning the millions of birds, dolphins, and whales they kill. There's a quote there that reads, the Harvard researchers found that the warming effect of wind turbines in the continental U.S. was actually larger than the effect of reduced emissions for the first century of its operation. This is because the warming effect is predominantly local to the wind farm, while greenhouse gas concentrations must be reduced globally before the benefits are realized. Miller and Keith repeated the calculation for solar power and found that its climate impacts were about 10 times smaller than wind's. The direct climate impacts of wind power are instant, while the benefits of reduced emissions accumulate slowly, said Keith. If your perspective is the next 10 years, and wind power actually has, in some respects, more climate impact than coal or gas. If your perspective is the next 1,000 years, then wind power has enormously less climatic impact than coal or gas. The goal was never green energy. It was control. There's a post here from U.S. Oil and Gas Association, US_OGA. From Bloomberg this AM, environmental activists are drafting blueprints for Harris to take a more aggressive stance, clamping down on fossil fuels, but in a shift from their approach to Biden 4 years ago, they've largely held their fire in public. So Americans and Europeans both should freeze? That's a response from Alex Jaffe at Dr. Alex, Joffe. We are the carbon they want to reduce. Jim Edsall responds, environmental activists don't understand that the economy is energy transformed. To quote L. Gave, killing FFs will kill people reliant on 24/7 energy, that's fossil fuels, will destroy our economy. The loudest EAs are the biggest hypocrites: Gore, DiCaprio, Obama, private planes, and beach homes. They want the rest of us to live in hovels and eat the bugs. They get to keep their private jets and meat. NorCal is Purple posted, "We're paying over $5 a gallon for gas in California. Don't allow the USA to become California." We can't afford to. Josh Peterson, J.D. Peterson, posted, "If I were a foreign adversary, I would fund environmental activists to craft policies like this and push American politicians to support undermining American energy independence." Bingo. Selena Zito at Zito Selena posts, "So you're saying they have a climate justice project for 2025? Or in response to the post from the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. Again, there's lots of links and things to read over here at twitchy.com. I'll leave the link to this and all of the stories I cover on this week's Atomic Biscuits out on my account at Gab. I'm at BACFA. AustralianPolitics.blogspot.com has this story: Israel's colonial secrets are hiding in plain sight. A rejoinder to Australia's anti-Semites. Journalists should be more skeptical of people claiming to be victims of colonial oppression. In a week when a highly paid Aboriginal senator with English and Irish heritage claimed King Charles's ancestors had stolen her land, too few asked about Lydia Thorpe's generous salary or elite status as a federal parliamentarian. Nor did enough pay attention to her mixed heritage. Neither is she ever challenged about standing with Palestinians against their Israeli colonizers. Indeed, reporters here seldom ask the obvious question about pro-Palestinian, largely Muslim, anti-Israel protesters. Aren't they colonizers here? Educated journalists should have worked out there is no evidence Jews, synonymous with Israel and Palestine for 3,800 years, are colonizers. Most of this column's Aboriginal friends have no time for Thorpe. Many admit they have benefited from the education this colony has given them. That's not to downplay the history of frontier violence in Australia's early days, especially Tasmania, but Thorpe is wrong to claim Aboriginal imprisonment rates and deaths in custody today justify her protest in front of the King. Friends of this column, Anthony Dillon and Warren Mundine, have pointed out many times that the 1991 Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Royal Commission report showed Aboriginal people die in prison at lower rates than the rest of the prison population. The real problem is Aboriginal offending rates, especially in regional and remote communities that often involve violence against women and children. Yet no one, least of all King Charles, would deny Australia was taken from its indigenous owners without treaty or negotiation. Sky News host Peter Cridlin observes the latest comments from Lydia Thorpe as the senator lands herself in more hot water. That's not the case with Jews in Israel. The colonizers of Europe have far more in common with Palestinians than they do with Jews, either those who fled Europe after the Holocaust or those who never left their ancestral lands. Most people who claim to be ethnic Palestinians also identify as Arabs, and Arabs did not originate in Palestine, they invaded from Arabia. Arab Muslims outdid the Romans, Greeks, and Alexander the Great in the colonizing stakes. Genealogical evidence today confirms most people who claim to be Palestinian are in fact of Arab background. Some can trace genetic links to the original Canaanite settlers of Israel, and some converted to Islam after the Arab conquest. But all ethnic Jews, including Jewish families who fled Europe after World War II, can trace genetic heritage to the Canaanites. The original Jews who settled in ancient Israel and Judea were a Canaanite clan. Only in the 1960s, after the formation of Yasser Arafat's PLO, that's the Palestinian Liberation Organization, did the area's Arabs start referring to themselves as Palestinians. The word Jew is a translation of the Hebrew Yehudi, a member of the tribe of Yehuda, or Judea, or Jude. Jews speak Hebrew, as did the ancient biblical Israelites. Their scriptures are written in Hebrew, the only Canaanite language still in use today. Palestinians speak Arabic, not a language known in the area until after the Muslim conquest between 636 and 640 AD. The word Palestine comes from the Hebrew anglicized as Paleshet, meaning invader. Prominent local Palestinian academic Randa Abdel Fattah last week shared a post from another Palestinian activist demanding people use the proper spelling for cities in Israel, Al-Quds for Jerusalem, Khalid for Netanyahu, and so on. This is laughable. The original Hebrew names predate Arab settlement by thousands of years. Abdel Fattah is in effect saying to someone like Thorpe that the real name for Uluru should be colonizer's name, Ayers Rock. Palestinian activists rely on resettlement of Jews from post-Holocaust Europe to claim Israel is a settler colony, and without any apparent awareness that 400,000 Arabs moved to the area under the British Mandate between the late 19th century and 1930. They came because Britain enforced labor and wages conditions not available in the wider Middle East. Arab Palestinians used to know the history. Youssef al-Khalidi, Arab mayor of Jerusalem, said in 1899, "Who can challenge the rights of Jews in Palestine? Good Lord, historically, it is really your country." The famous Nazi collaborator and Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, oversaw a 1929 publication that said that the Al-Aqsa Mosque had been built on top of two Jewish temples. This is correct archaeologically. It says, the site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest, perhaps prehistoric times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. This too is the spot, according to universal belief, on which David built an altar to the Lord. The UN's own definition of indigeneity lists 7 prerequisites. The Jews in Israel meet them all. The third, a strong link to territorial and natural resources, is a slam dunk. Jewish practice and culture are inextricably linked to the physical land of Israel, much like traditional Aboriginal custom here. Zion is a hill in Jerusalem. The return to Zion, a central feature of Jewish practice, happened after the Babylonian exile and biblically after the Exodus from Egypt. Jews still pray at the same sacred sites they prayed at thousands of years ago, what's left of the temple in Jerusalem and the tombs of the matriarchs and patriarchs in Hebron, among others. Hebrew place names today are the same as those used by the ancient Israelites. Even the Jordan River comes from the Hebrew word Yarden, meaning to descend. Jews see themselves as custodians of the land. A major part of the Jewish project is environmental restoration, making the desert bloom again, like the fertile land of the Israelites. They believe desertification and the rise of coastal swampland came from unsustainable Arab farming practices. Like fallow land in Europe, Jews still use an ancient kosher practice called Shemitah. Every 7 years the land is rested from farming. Arguing Jews are colonizers flies in the face of documented history, archaeology, and genealogy. Yet Palestine and Arabia are the crucibles of the greatest colonizing forces in history, respectively the world's 2.4 billion Christians and 1.9 billion Muslims. While Judaism predates both by thousands of years, there are only 14 million Jews worldwide. As this column wrote on October 14th last year, a week after the October 7th massacre, Judaism is not a missionary religion. Jews have only one country and seek neither converts nor colonies. That column also said Israel needs to be feared to survive in a region largely committed to its destruction. The murders of October 7 last year and the anti-Semitism of Hamas and Hezbollah have cost tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian lives. Like the Islamist terror of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, most victims of Islamism globally are other Muslims. That's the real Palestinian tragedy, the repeated failures of their leaders to accept two-state solutions offered several times since 1947, and the willingness of Islamists to risk innocent Muslim lives. This article goes on quite a bit longer. You can find it over at australian-politics.blogspot.com. One America News, OANN.com, has Paul Pelosi's hammer-wielding attacker, David DePape, sentenced to life without parole. This is by Brooke Mallory. Following his state conviction, David DePape, the man who assaulted Nancy Pelosi's husband in their San Francisco home 2 years ago, was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole on Tuesday. DePape's conviction for aggravated kidnapping in connection with the 2022 attack on Paul Pelosi was sentenced by a San Francisco judge. In the state case, DePape was also sentenced to 8 years on additional offenses. DePape had an opportunity to speak to the court and the Pelosi family prior to the sentencing. However, it was anticipated that his lawyers would first request a new trial. Police claim that in an attempt to abduct and hold hostage then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, DePape broke into the Pelosi family's Pacific Heights home in October of 2022. However, she and Vice President Kamala Harris were reportedly in Washington for a keynote address. DePape struck Paul Pelosi with a hammer while San Francisco police officers attempted to intervene. Mr. Pelosi stayed in the hospital for weeks in order to recuperate. DePape is currently serving a 30-year sentence in federal prison. According to the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, the punishment serves as a reminder that violence against public servants and their families will not be tolerated, will not be accepted. Regarding the attacker's past, DePape was reportedly part of a nudist advocacy group in San Francisco's Castro district, according to State Senator Scott Wiener, who spoke with KRON4. I've been aware of him for a long time because he was associated with the public nudity folks in the Castro. It's a long history with him, Wiener explained. Additionally, DePape's ex-partner, Oksane Gypsy Taub, an activist who claimed that she was also the mother of his children, previously spoke to outlet ABC7 and described what may have been going through his head. Taub was found guilty on 20 counts in 2021, which included attempting to abduct a 14-year-old boy in Berkeley, the outlet reported. He is mentally ill. He has been mentally ill for a long time, said Taub. He came back in very bad shape. He thought he was Jesus. He was constantly paranoid, thinking people were after him, she added. According to legal analyst Stephen Clark, DePape's statements in court on Tuesday will be crucial to his future legal proceedings. That'll be very important if he's going to try to get out on parole at a later date, Clark stated. He needs to express remorse and show that he understands the magnitude of what he did to Mr. Pelosi and his family and to America. DePape's defense team has declared they will appeal the state case, arguing the two convictions amount to double jeopardy. According to Clark, the appeals court may raise concerns about DePape's mental state. What never came through in this case was Mr. DePape's mental state, Clark added. And will an appellate court look at this case and ask why wasn't his mental health brought to light during this trial to reflect on what he did and whether that affects his behavior? That is over at OANN.com. Over at SarahACarter.com, Netanyahu looks to expand peace deals with Arab nations post-conflict with Hamas and Hezbollah. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed hope on Monday for expanding Israel's peace accords with Arab nations after its current conflict with Iranian-backed groups Hamas and Hezbollah is resolved. Reuters reports that speaking before Parliament, Netanyahu outlined a vision for regional stability extending beyond the military realm and into the diplomatic sphere. The day after Hamas no longer controls Gaza and Hezbollah no longer sits on our northern border, we are working these days on plans to stabilize those two fronts, Netanyahu said. But the day after includes something else of utmost importance. Netanyahu pointed to the historic Abraham Accords, a series of U.S. brokered normalization agreements signed in 2020, as a foundation for further Arab-Israeli relations. The accords have so far seen Israel establish formal diplomatic relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. I aspire to continue the process I led a few years ago of the signing of the historic Abraham Accords and achieve peace with more Arab countries, he said. The Abraham Accords marked a significant shift in Middle Eastern alliances, with the U.S. playing a central role. With Washington's support, Israel has pursued additional normalization, particularly with Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia has consistently stated that recognition of Israel would only follow the establishment of a Palestinian state. Netanyahu emphasized a shared interest among neighboring countries in creating a stable, secure, and economically prosperous Middle East, underscoring Israel's fight against the Iranian axis of evil as a concern shared by potential partners. These countries and other countries see clearly the blows we are landing on those who attack us, the Iranian axis of evil, he said. They aspire like us for a stable, secure, and prosperous Middle East. And again, that's over at sarahacarter.com.
It's become clear that people in this country and globally have been steamrolled. It is also clear that it has been coordinated globally. It is also clear that it has been integrated, not just over 6 months, not just over 2.5 years, but it has been planned over decades. The changes to legislation in this country were done so that they could control doctors and people. But the people are waking, and it's thanks to people like Dr. Altman and all the presenters here today, thanks to people like Senator Babette and Craig Kelly. We know and we knew that this is all bullshit and that we've been had. But we are going to hound you down, the people that are guilty. We are going to hound you down and hold you accountable, and we will expose your global agenda so that the people of Australia can be free in the future. Because I love my kids, and I'm looking forward to my grandkids. And we are going to save this country.
More than 14 million children in 2022 did not receive a single dose of vaccine. Working together with partners like Gavi and UNICEF, we aim to halve that number by 2030. But you know the serious challenge that's posed by anti-vaxxers, and I think we need to strategize to really push back, because vaccines work, vaccines affect adults, and we have science evidence on our side. I think it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. I think they use COVID as an opportunity, and all the havoc they're creating.
The issues with the programming of the bats, with specifically
Yes.
on Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that only caught in the past few days, and why can't it be fixed? I saw the release.
Yeah, this is a nationwide issue with Dominion voter access terminals in the counties that use them. And the voter access terminals, of course, not all the machines, just the ones that are accessible, have an issue with the straight party voting and a programming issue that's, again, affected the machines nationwide. And I think all of us that use Dominion machines were unhappy to learn about this during the the testing period and as early voting began. So we're working with Dominion to seek accountability on that front, and also are working with our clerks to ensure voters are aware of this programming issue that will require them to ensure they are voting every section on the ballot.
Do you think it's a bigger issue in Michigan because we do allow voters to cross over in ways that a lot of other states don't?
Because we have straight party. It's not struck me as I've talked to my other colleagues in other states. They're just as upset about it as we are. So, yeah, or surprised, I think. Yeah.
To be very clear, we do not see this as a full security threat to the state. This is not a security threat.
You do frequent media interviews warning of the insider threats to elections. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security defines an insider threat as somebody who uses authorized access wittingly or unwittingly to do harm. Did the actions of your office pose an insider threat to elections?
No.
In 2021, when Mesa County's voting system passwords leaked, your office said, quote, "The public disclosure of the BIOS passwords for one or more components of Mesa County's voting system alone constitutes a serious breach of voting system security protocols. By that standard, did your office commit a serious breach of voting system security protocols?"
Well, to push back on you, Kyle, that sentence is in the press release, but there is a much bigger press release. And part of that investigation in Mesa County was 2 sets of passwords, unauthorized access, stolen passwords, and it was in a different time. Since 2021 and what happened in Mesa County, our security has improved, including the 24/7 hour cameras, including the badge and access. The law has been significantly strengthened since then. We have multiple layers in place to ensure situations like Mesa County don't occur, and that is not what is occurring here.
These are the times that I am discouraged about my job as a representative and also just what happens here at the Capitol. We sat in a committee all day discussing whether or not somebody that buys little children, these are 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kids, and they buy them for sex, that we tried to get a bill through, Representative Bradley sent one through, that was going to put these buyers in jail. Right now, most of the time, they get off on probation. Almost all the time, they get off on probation after buying a child and raping a little child. And we tried to say, well, they need to at least serve a minimum of 4 years. And then we sat and listened to the Democrats fight against this bill, fight against putting these people in jail, and came up with all kinds of reasons, including that these buyers are victims themselves. This is very discouraging, and it's also very disgusting for me that they would actually defend this. And then they voted completely along party lines. The Democrats voted 100% that they did not want to put these pedophiles in jail. They defended the pedophiles. This is why it's so difficult sometimes to do what we do around here. We know we're on the side of right, we know we're on the side of morality, and we get shot down by, I do not understand the thought process behind this, but we do get shot down. This is why I would encourage you to do a few things to help us with this. First, if you believe in prayer at all, please pray. We are fighting truly dark forces here. This is not okay. This is evil stuff that we're dealing with. And if you have the ability to come up and testify on bills or anything like this, please do so. Your voice is very important to what we're trying to accomplish around here. We are the minority, but with you, we become a powerful force.
AmericanThinker.com has this post, Disinformation, the Dark Sword of Tyranny, posted by Ed Thompson. We hear that misinformation is wrong information, disinformation is deliberate wrong information, and malinformation, a newly coined Orwellian term that hasn't yet weaseled its way into the dictionary, is true information that goes against the regime narrative and thereby does harm. Example: Biden is a strong president. Clearly misinformation. The Hunter laptop is Russian propaganda. Disinformation. The Hunter laptop story is true, but runs counter to the Biden narrative, so it was suppressed. Malinformation. Disinformation is a powerful tool for wannabe tyrants. Those who practice the disinformation dark arts wield a double-edged sword. With one edge, the government apparatus claims their critics and opponents are spreading harmful disinformation and use their considerable power to censor and eradicate dissent. Much of the term hate speech opens the door to the suppression of free speech. Disinformation is the skeleton key of modern domestic propaganda and censorship. With it, the regime can target political movements, specific politicians, and prominent voices on the grounds that they are influenced by or enthralled to foreign disinformation. The goal is consensus. Silencing all opposing views creates by default an apparent unity of thought. The climate change crisis is a prime example of censorship creating false consensus. The grain of truth is that the effective techniques of disinformation were honed by our intelligence branches in foreign areas, in foreign arenas against other governments and peoples. However, putting parents who talk at school board meetings, Catholics who pray with rosary beads, pro-life protesters, and Americans who disagree with transmania, vaccines, climate crisis, or war on government lists of potential terrorists is beyond the pale. The other edge of the disinformation sword is the government directly pushing false narratives. The direct assertion of lies requires more coordinated support, especially from the media. A prime example was the government wanted to spy on Trump and his campaign in the phony Russia collusion hoax. The FBI hired operatives to write false reports, leaked stories to media outlets they controlled, and then packaged it all together as evidence to obtain spy warrants. Safe and effective vaccines is another example of a false narrative. No one in government speaks of these, presumably because the government never lies. Pushing lies out broadly is a form of brute force attack where the lie is replicated many thousands of times on hundreds of channels until the lie solidifies in the minds of the target audience. The sometimes hidden, sometimes overt coordination of academics, journalists, and public intellectuals to push a regime-backed political line is justified as the needed counterbalance to all the disinformation narratives out there. Anyone can use this double-edged attack on truth, but the government has an overwhelming advantage because it controls regulation, the police branches, and the courts, which together provide tremendous force and leverage no outsider can match. Who manages the American government disinformation apparatus? The DHS, FBI, DOD, NSA, CIA, to name a few. The DHS includes a list of 374 search words to be tracked in the department's 2011 Analyst Desktop Binder used at the National Operations Center. A senior DHS official claimed the manual is a starting point, not the end game, in maintaining situational awareness of natural and man-made threats, and denied the government was monitoring signs of dissent. The talk is always about threats, but the real threat to regime power is dissent. The manual even instructs workers to identify media reports that reflect adversely on DHS. The U.S. government issues secret keyword warrants to Google for anyone who looks up certain phrases and names, allowing police and other spy agencies to dig through Google's search history database to identify innocent people merely based on what they might have searched and used that for further intrusion, despite the complete violation of Fourth Amendment protections. In July 2021, Guardian article with the headline, "Majority of COVID misinformation came from 12 people report fines," claims these 12 villains were responsible for lies about COVID-19 and the vax, much of the COVID pandemic, and many deaths. The Disinformation Dozen was created by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, a left-wing censorship NGO based in the UK with ties to both the UK and US governments, used as talking points by the White House and their shills, and reverberated by all of mainstream media. It is 2024, and oh, how things change. We know COVID-19 came from a gain-of-function lab. Lockdowns and masks didn't work. The COVID vaccines were not effective and have caused and are still causing great harm. Far from the villains they were made out to be, the so-called disinformation dozen are consummate professionals who were simply telling the truth. That didn't protect them from being censored, railroaded from their professions, and ostracized from general society as crazy conspiracy nuts who push disinformation. European governments are leading the disinformation charge, arresting dissenters under vague and arbitrary hate speech laws that are thinly veiled censorship decrees allowing them to quash dissent and criticism. The EU has demanded that X censor content or face prosecution. France arrested the Telegram founder for refusing their demands for censorship. The U.S. isn't far behind. A U.S. federal court ruled that the FBI and DHS pressured social media companies to remove content it deemed as disinformation, including posts from accounts that originated within the United States. When a court injunction threatened their operation, the censorship apparatus panicked. They got a reprieve when the Supreme Court, in a terrible act of cowardice, lifted the injunction and refused to address the government's attempt to destroy the First Amendment. The DOJ announced indictments on 2 Russians in an attempt to smear several conservative media influencers. The assault on free speech has accelerated, and the means to do it are being hardened into place. Accomplishing the dark days of tyranny in the U.S. requires trickery. Trick number 1, redefine democracy not as the people choosing their government, but as the government institutions themselves. When you hear the Attorney General bleating out about people criticizing the DOJ being a threat to democracy, he's attacking the actual exercise of democracy. Trick number 2, declare broad areas of society like the internet and elections to be part of national security. This gives the federal government the immediate right to interfere using censorship, surveillance, or even prosecution, all in the name of protecting national security. Trick number 3, confuse the subject of information with terms like misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and hate speech. Redefining the very words is used as part of this disinformation campaign. The darkest deed of any tyranny is claiming its own lies are truth and its opponents' truths are lies. Disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation form a shapeless, shifting bog that underlies the government disinformation program and threatens to pull anyone under who might fall into disfavor with the ruling regime. Censoring what you don't like to hear is the end of free speech and the death of a free society. When the regime narrative can be completely devoid of truth, no one is safe. What is true for you is what you've observed. No government can be the arbiter of truth, nor can it censor its way to the truth. The only solution is more free speech, and one by one, removing those from power who insists on throttling the free exercise thereof. That's again over at AmericanThinker.com. My good buddy over at the New York Post, nypost.com, Betsy McCaughey, turned in this article: New York City needs to take back the ever more powerful and deranged city council. Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani, an assemblyman from Queens, has jumped into the New York City mayor's race with the backing of the same group that engineered the election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Congress. Now it's time for us to get to work to replace our corrupt, autocratic mayor with a proven socialist, the Democratic Socialists of America declared. And Israel Hader, they forgot to mention. With Mayor Adams facing legal woes, Mamdani is just the latest of several far-left candidates to declare plans to run for his job. But even if a moderate candidate defeats these leftists, putting a new leader in City Hall will not be enough to reverse the city's rapid deterioration, because the problem doesn't lie in the mayor's office alone, but down the hall in the city council. Adams was handicapped from day one, long before the corrupt judges, by an ideologically extreme council that threatens him like a piñata. And New Yorkers crying out for a city government with a common sense agenda, safe subway rides, good schools, order instead of chaos on the streets, have themselves in part to blame. In last year's local elections, when all 51 council seats were up for grabs, voter turnout was a dismal 7.2% for the primaries and 12.8% in the general election. The number of New Yorkers who went to the polls, 578,877, barely exceeded the number who voted with their feet, 546,146, and moved out of the city over the previous 3 years. And now we're all paying the price. The city council is willfully destroying public safety, quality of life, even affirming that sleeping on the street is a right. The impact on your neighborhood be damned. The council defeated Adams' attempted to restrain spending and prioritize crime fighting in its budget agreement finalized in June. Spends 18.3% more than former Mayor Bill de Blasio's final budget, and de Blasio was a reckless spendthrift, with none of the increased spending devoted to increasing manpower at the New York Police Department, where headcount is disastrously low. In another attack on crime fighting, the council enacted the How Many Stops Act, which forces cops to fill out complicated paperwork every time they interact with anyone, whether a suspect or not. The mayor vetoed it, but the council had the votes to override him. What's next? Proposed legislation would muzzle the NYPD from criticizing council members on social media. The council wants to halt freedom of expression for cops, but increase it for accused criminals. Councilwoman Crystal Hudson, Democrat from Brooklyn, says sex accessories like prosthetic penises and wigs for transgenders Rikers Island inmates should be our priority. Forget about public safety and economic prosperity. Most council members don't even pay lip service to those goals. Worse, the extremist majority is plotting a power grab. Speaker Adrienne Adams is proposing a charter revision commission under her control, not the mayor's. The new commission's recommendations would appear on the ballot in 2025-2026. One likely revision would give the City Council advice and consent over mayoral appointees to run the New York Police Department and most agencies, a change that would destroy mayoral accountability and allow the council to, for example, push an anti-policing candidate into the police commissioner's office. The council showed it's unfit to give advice and consent with its shameful grilling last month of lawyer Randy Mastro, Adams' choice, for corporation counsel. Mastro was asked accusatory questions like, "Why don't you feel comfortable as a white man to replace a woman of color?" But all is not lost, New Yorkers. It is possible to elect a common-sense city council. Take, for example, Christy Marmorato, who this year became the first Republican to represent the Bronx in 40 years, even though only 14% of voters in her district belong to the GOP. She ran in 2023 on quality of life issues like crime and affordable housing that matter to all her neighbors, Latino and black voters included. But the Republican Party is falling down on its job. All too many Democrat council candidates have run unopposed or have received Republicans' cross-endorsement, 33% of them in 2023, offering voters zero reason to turn out on Election Day at all. Where's the GOP in the city's time of crisis? Anyway, there's more here over at nypost.com. Good old Mad Cow wheels out neocon Newland to declare Russia is interfering in 2024 election. That's the story from Tyler Durden over at ZeroHedge.com. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow can't let an election go by without wheeling out the usual cadre of tired old neocons, with the latest to appear on her show being former State Department official Victoria Nuland. As expected, she sought to lump Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Vladimir Putin together in a segment of disinformation this week. "He's at it again," Nuland claimed of Putin, resurrecting talking points heavily featured in prior two elections as well. She accused Musk of being an essential, useful idiot of the Kremlin, allowing Putin to use sophisticated tools on his X platform to interfere and influence voters. And he has more sophisticated tools. He's got a brand new, very powerful tool, which is Elon Musk and X, Nuland claimed of Putin, and by extension Trump, according to her talking points. In 2020, the social media companies worked hard with the U.S. government to try to do content moderation to try to catch this stuff as it was happening. This time we have Elon Musk talking directly to the Kremlin and ensuring that every time the Russians put out something, it gets 5 million views before anyone can watch it. Nuland continued, and then she warned, Trump is taking Putin lessons, as autocrats around the world are. Maddow, for her part, added, for the United States to not be the leader of the free world, but rather to effectively a sort of axis with dictators of Russia and China and North Korea. So clearly Maddow wanted to escalate the claims. Maddow, for her part, added, for the United States to not be the leader of the free world, but rather ineffectively a sort of axis with the dictators of Russia and China and North Korea. So clearly Maddow wanted to escalate the claims to put Trump in league with all dictators of the world, absurdly enough. For the United States to be allied with those countries instead of our traditional alliances, I'm not sure people have absorbed the magnitude of what you're describing there, Maddow followed with. For a third consecutive presidential election, Russiagate propagandists are accusing Russia of manipulating Americans into not voting for their preferred candidate. Here, Victoria Nuland complains that Twitter is no longer partnering with the U.S. government to censor stories, what she calls the content moderation that we saw in 2020. This is where reference to censoring journalism on Hunter Biden's laptop based on the CIA lie that it was Russian disinformation. Speaking of Russia and election interference, Nuland is well versed in practicing it. As a senior State Department official, she was instrumental in funneling the Clinton-funded Steele dossier into the FBI. She personally authorized the early July 2016 meeting where Steele gave an FBI agent his dossier, which helped kick off the multi-year Russiagate scam. And another commenter wrote that Nuland openly longs for the day of the U.S. government/Twitter 1.0 censorship collusion. Free speech on X is under assault. Their information monopoly has been destroyed in an election cycle, and they desperately want the Twitter 1.0 censorship regime back. Again, that's over at zerohedge.com. TheGatewayPundit.com has the story FBI whistleblower tells Congress former FBI Director James Comey inserted 2 female agent honeypots inside the Trump 2016 campaign separate from the Russia hoax investigations by Jim Hoft. So we're just finding out about this now? According to an FBI whistleblower, former Director James Comey inserted 2 female agents inside the Trump campaign in 2016. The Washington Times reported that the female agents were directed to act as honeypots and travel with Trump and his staff. This was an off-the-books operation and was separate from Comey and Obama's Crossfire Hurricane operation that targeted Trump based on false Russian collusion lies. For years now, we have not seen any high-level whistleblowers from the FBI during the debunked Crossfire Hurricane investigation of Trump. The entire FBI and DOJ was in on this assault on candidate and then President Donald Trump for years, despite knowing that the entire investigation was based on a lie that Trump was being influenced by Russia and Putin. It was later well documented that it was Hillary Clinton who had created the lie from whole cloth. Hillary was later fined for funding the fake Russia dossier that was used to spy on Trump, his family, his campaign, and his administration. The whistleblower told Congress that the investigation was hid from DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz, another lackey for the regime. The details of this investigation was kept from President Trump's criminal defense counsels. This is the latest piece of evidence that details the absolute criminal mindset of the current FBI leadership. There's more here to read over at thegatewaypundit.com. to wrap things up for this episode, I wanted to cover this story. Mises.org has this article, Government Gaslights People About the Economy. Public opinion polls consistently show the economy is one of the top issues, if not the top issue, for American voters. This may strike some as odd since official government statistics show low unemployment and declining price inflation, suggesting the Federal Reserve has engineered a soft landing, bringing down inflation without causing a recession. So why the concern over the economy? One reason is more people are realizing government economic figures hide the truth about the economy. Recession since 2022. U.S. economic income and output have fallen overall for 4 years. It's a Brownstone Institute research paper by Dr. E.J. Antoni, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and Dr. Peter St. Onge, a fellow with the Mises Institute. It details how the federal government understands inflation while making wages, profits, and economic growth appear stronger. Dr. Antoni and Dr. St. Onge used a more accurate measure of inflation than that used by government to uncover the true state of the economy. Their calculations showed that the U.S. economy has been in recession since 2022. The government claims that gross domestic product increased by approximately 13.37% from 2019 through the first half of 2022. When the more accurate inflation number is used, the result is a 2.5% decline in GDP. The federal government's figures also showed the American people's disposable income increased by 12.9% from 2019 through the first half of 2024. However, when the more accurate way of calculating price inflation is used, it shows Americans' disposable income declined by 23%. The federal government's figures also show the American people's disposable income increased by 12.9% from 2019 through the first half of 2024. However, when the more accurate way of calculating price inflation is used, it shows Americans' disposable income declined by 2.3%. Dr. Antoni and Dr. St. Onge are hardly the first to expose how the government uses doctored statistics to make the economy look stronger. John Williams' Shadow Stats has regularly shown how government manipulates data to underreport underemployment and price inflation. Government distortions of economic data mislead the people regarding the true nature of the economy. They also mislead Congress, the President, and maybe even the Federal Reserve. Until the Fed bill becomes law, we will not know for sure what data the central bank relies on. Making economic policy decisions based on flawed enables politicians to ignore the dangers posed by Congress's refusal to cut federal spending. There's more to read over here at Mises.org.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as BitChute, Rumble, D-Live and Odyssey. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.